Just a quick note from me before we dive into this episode. When I recorded this, I was so excited to catch up with my dear friend Tenille that I didn't properly introduce her and her work. Tenille is a musician amongst many other things. I met her years ago when she was the founder of ELMA, Emotional Literacy and Mindfulness Academy for Kids. More recently, and the project that we mostly discuss here, is her recent launch of the document series Does Sound Heal? It takes audiences on an extraordinary journey into the heart of sound and music and uncovering their potential to heal the human body and mind. So now that you've met Tenille, let's dive into this creative conversation.
Tenille, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh,
And
thank you for having
so
me.
exciting to see you. I haven't, so I've known you for a number of years now, but I haven't actually seen your beautiful face or had a chat with you in a couple of years. So catch me up. What's been happening? What have you been working on? So I've seen all of that stuff that, pops up on social media, but what does that look like behind the scenes? Can you tell me more?
Oh gosh, that looks like long hours, sleepless nights, yeah, long hours. Like, yeah, it's one of those things. I think I posted it a while back about it. And no one really gets to see what really goes on behind the scenes, and all they see is these incredible projects coming out. But yeah, the tireless hours for very little or no money in financial exchange, for the sheer love of doing it, but it's just so rewarding. It's like when you take away that intrinsic motivation for money, it's like your values change, and it's like, okay, I this I mean, I still think, money is essential and we need it. And I love it. I think it's great. It, feeds me, it houses me, it does all incredible. It's in a beautiful energy that I have a huge amount of respect for and a good relationship with. But when you're doing something where it's like purely just from no attachment to outcome, no attachment to anything, it's just pure creativity.
Mm.
It's been like, so since we saw each other, it's been like painting an art piece and not really knowing what it's going to be at the end, and just kind of following the colors and the textures and the curves and all of that. And it's just like, okay, we're going this way. And that's kind of what it's been like. And so that's sort of manifested in the form of, the Does Sound Heal documentary, which we've been working tirelessly on for the last sort of 4 years. And with COVID, that created a few issues for the vision of what we were going to do. And then, of course, with Alma, so, with the Emotional Literacy and Mindfulness Academy, which we now do work for early childhood and teens. And yeah, and then I'm sort of still, doing my music with January and Julian, and Encoder as well, and just with the orchestra. And so there's a whole heap of different things that have really played out. So it's been a busy time. It's been, but it's been full, and throw in a few family dramas there too, then that just makes it life, doesn't it?
I remember when we first met, it was around the time that you were developing Elma and you were starting to step away from hosting all of the mindfulness workshops and courses yourself. And
Gosh,
at
that
the
would have
time,
been
I
about
was,
8 years, 9 years ago,
yeah, I
maybe.
was working with and coaching young mums at the time. So that was kind of like what, I can't remember who put us in contact, but I remember that first time we met. I don't know if I've actually shared this with you, but we met at a cafe, and you walked up or I walked up, I saw you, and the first thing that I just felt or heard, when your intuition communicates with you, and it kind of
Yeah.
sounds like, but it's a feeling, but I remember feeling sister.
Mm.
But oh, is it because she reminds me physically of my sister? And I was like, maybe it's kind of like that, like vegetarian vibes or something like that. And at the time I was like, because I'd never spoken to you before, but that was just the first thing that came up. And I just love how you've got this
Beautiful.
warm and beautiful energy. Um,
Oh, thank you.
what I'm really curious about is that, like, when we were just chatting before I started recording, you talked about how you kind of were following these cosmic breadcrumbs. I love how you call it that. I
Mm.
feel like back then that was the case, as you told me how you'd created Elma, but how did that work with the docu-series? Like what? what were those breadcrumbs that led you to creating a documentary about sound?
Yeah, it was really something that was, yeah, I remember going through this time, and it's like you kind of feel like you're in sync, and you got this one-way communication with the universe or God or source. And I just started, like, where it happened was I was, so the concept of sort of using sound and frequency was something I'd already been working heavily in, and I was like, how do we quantify this? How can we do something a little bit more different with this? And anyway, as I was sort of thinking all of that, I had for Alma, this was kind of the beautiful crossover. I went to Channel 9 to do an interview for one of their segments, and when I arrived there, the gentleman that met me there, his name's Joe, and he was the head of sound. And so we're walking up, and he's got his clipboard. And as we walk up, he says, "Are you Tenille Bentley, the one that works with frequency?" And as soon as he said that intuition thing, like what you had, I saw this like angel like go ding on his shoulder, and I heard the ding, and I was just like, oh, this is going to be good. I was like, in my head, I'm like, this is going to be good. I don't know what's happening, but this is one of those defining moments, and I don't know what it means. And I'm like, yeah, I am. I do frequency. And so we went into this big conversation about frequency and sound, and he's obsessed, obviously, with being head of sound. And he's moved on since, but he's like, his sound and music have been something that have been really, really like prominent in his life. And so we'd shared stories. And as we were sharing stories, I was telling them about what we're doing and what I'm wanting to do and my vision. And he said, "Oh, we should. I'll talk to Joe. I think we could create a really interesting documentary about sound." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." Like, and before that, it was only a week before. I'm like, what I'm creating in my mind, I was like, this needs to be documented. Like, there needs to be a time capsule for this, but I got no idea how to do it. And I was like, said to the universe source, I'm like,
But Joe does.
I need this help, like it was kind of like a very intentional, like, order to the universe in some ways. It's like, okay, I know this is good, and I know this is gifted from you, and I need help with this as to what the next step is. And I can feel that documenting it would be really important. So can you put me in touch with someone that does it? And then a week later, here I go. And all of these things have been happening through the whole journey of just these synchronicities. And so I sit down with what is now my co-producers of the documentary, and we start storyboarding, the very huge rabbit hole of sound and how it's used in therapeutic purposes, and where it sort of can go. And so we began that journey, and we started to document, and what was interesting was it became quite a personal journey, which I didn't expect. I was thinking I was just going to interview people and they're like, "Oh, actually, no, your story's really interesting." I'm like, okay. And then before I know it, like, my whole life is in there. Like, I was like, okay, all right. But that's what made it, it's a good introduction, because I will be taking people through the journey of future episodes of looking at how it helps with Alzheimer's, how we work in medicine, and some of the research projects that I'm working on in quantifying, the 432 hertz frequency, and the work that I use in sound therapy. So yeah, it really, and then it was just literally this unfolding. And so we began by, when January, Julian and I played in Cottesloe, we sort of began there, and they kind of documented some of that, and we weren't really sure the direction. We had a storyboard, but we also allowed the openness for it to become what it needed to become. And then we, 4 years later, because 2 years of COVID sort of shut it down a bit, so it was about a 2.5 year, 3 year project, and now we are at the complete product of it, and we screened it around Australia, and it's just taken me on a wild journey.
So what's the best way for people to get access to this documentary? Where do you
Yeah, so
find
it's not
it?
available on streaming platforms yet, but
Do
because
people
we're
kind of
just
request to stream it in their town or in their...
yeah, if they've got an independent cinema, we're doing the cinema rounds right now. So if so the documentary is called Does Sound Heal, and it just takes people on this journey of both science and and the mystical, unquantifiable parts of sound. And it's done in a really balanced way where it's intersecting art and science, which I feel like has been separated over generations.
And I think that's one of the main topics that we've always discussed is like that's something that fascinates me as well. It's like it's not
Yeah.
all about the spiritual. There is this science and there is the they're not two different things.
No, they used to be
People will
together.
look into, yeah, people will look into one area or another depending on what their personal beliefs are or whatever their particular agenda is at the time. But
Yeah.
ultimately, people are coming to the same result in these different ways. But how can we kind of bridge them and bring them back together to
Yeah. Yeah. So
to
that's sort of the
one's...
goal. Yeah, and that's sort of the goal with Does Sound Heal. So yeah, so if people want to find out more, they just go to doessoundheal.com and everything will be on there.
all those links below. So you mentioned the frequency 432 hertz. That's the heart, is it?
So 432 hertz, 528 is sort of the heart, the love frequency, but 432 hertz is said to be so on two parts, the science side, and because that's just how my brain works. So we've got the science side and we've got the mysticism or the mystical side. The mystical, sort of metaphysical side says that 432 hertz is the mathematical equation of the earth. It is the frequency of our earth, of Mother Nature, and that it's a healing frequency for, physical, emotional, spiritual release and well-being. On the science side, it is basically the sound wave that we typically listen to is 440 hertz, which is 440 cycles per second of the sound wave before it hits our ear. But with 432, it's slower. So it's slightly flatter. Unless you're pitch perfect, you won't pick it up. But it's just slightly flatter. So the cycle of that sound wave is going slower. So the theory is that if you're listening to this dominant frequency, say in a room, if I'm doing it in a room with people, that becomes the dominant frequency. Mm-hmm. And then the way that the cells work by either, if you believe in them, the mirror neurons in the brain or the ability for the cell to, for us to mimic, they begin to mimic that dominant frequency. So everyone walks in with a different vibration, different frequency at a subatomic level. We put them under a microscope and we can see that they're, vibrating at a certain rate. So when they come in, what happens is this dominant frequency sort of becomes the main frequency in the room. Our cells begin to mimic it. And then what happens is, this is why why I feel people have physical reactions, is because when we have trauma or some kind of stress, and we don't process it, the cells hold it in the memory and it becomes like a pain body point, right? And that's how disease forms. So it forms in clumps in the body, certain parts, whether it's the heart or the liver or whatever it is. And when this becomes the dominant frequency and your cells and there begins to get movement and it starts to change and adjust that frequency, people will feel tingling in those parts of the body, maybe where the pain hasn't been processed. It might be heaviness. Often I get people saying, oh my gosh, my arms felt like lead. Like, I don't know why they were so heavy and my chest was really heavy. And, and that's because it has a way of, from my perspective, it has a way of kind of clearing those blockages or finding where they are. And I usually just say to people just to breathe through it. But again, there's not a huge body of work in the scientific field around the 432 hertz. There is, but it's inconclusive. And so, what I'm wanting to do is, we're sort of potentially working with some neuroscientists and head of psychologies from Murdoch and UWA, University of WA, and working with them to kind of quantify, hopefully, this. I mean, I know the metaphysical side of me is like, how do you quantify something that's unquantifiable? Like, how do you measure it? But I like a challenge, so I'm like, let's try.
It's
Yeah.
also like one of those things that I think for us as creatives would be like, oh, how do you do that? But then, well, we don't know, but I'm pretty sure that the head of neuroscience will have a pretty good idea of where to start.
Yeah, and I think it's just sort of these sides of finding the balance between the two worlds, because sometimes the pendulum can swing too far one way where you're too heavy in the science and you forget that we're floating in a planet in the universe. Like, that's magical. Like people forget that we're in this planet that just seems to be floating, and it's at the perfect temperature in the Goldilocks, like they call the Goldilocks, environment. And 1 or 2 degrees either way, it's dead, like it's just like, it's fascinating. There's so much we don't know. So it's like having that balance between, that measurable, quantifiable science, but really science is really all that science is about is finding answers and rediscovering truth, because when they discover something, then they discover something new that counteracts that thing. So it's just this constant evolution of discovering new truths. But yeah, and having that balance between the two, I think, is really important. I think too far one way and then too far the other way, you kind of, somewhere in the middle is good.
Yeah, and I think as well, just having that openness to admit that there are things that we don't know and
Exactly.
that we might fully not understand in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pushback from people who are very, very set on what they once believed to be true. Whereas to innovate and to create, we need to be able to destroy what we once believed to be true or what we once thought was the way, to see what else is there. And without that beautiful, I mean, I think that that's what creativity teaches us, right? Is that there's a cycle of creation and destruction, and to be totally okay with that because it's all part of it. And if something comes crumbling down, doesn't mean that we were wrong or that we wasted that time in creating that. It's just all part of this process of recreating itself and becoming something new, because nothing's ever lost. Sorry, my cacao's got a bit of spice in it. And
Oh.
I kind of get that, like,
Oh, yeah, no, that's so beautiful. I love the way you put that. That's exactly what it is. Exactly.
so what I actually didn't realize that the series was ongoing. Like I thought that it was a kind of mini series that was now complete. But where's this going next? What?
Yeah, so at the moment we're just screening around cinemas, and we've done Australia and we're looking at the US market now, and then we're in talks with some potential distributors, and what that will do will allow the film to go on streaming platforms. And then from there, if we can secure something like that, then we can look at potentially getting funding to do the next episode and the next episode. So it's a bit of a long game, but it's kind of, again, that it's kind of this I've sort of feel like there's an art to dancing between following the flow of intuition and the divine timing, and then knowing when to step forward and when to step back. And it's kind of like being a bit like that. It's kind of this dance between, okay, now, and then you go, and then it's like, okay, pull back, and then okay, now, and then okay, pull back. And it's kind of been like that. So right now we're kind of in the go phase, and now it's getting it out there and getting the work out there, and creating the conversation. That's really what it's about, is starting the conversation, and then building out a series of how it works in the fields of science and medicine, and how sound is being therapeutic, having therapeutic qualities on people, both in modern science and then also in ancient wisdom. So yeah.
So can I ask, what would be your ultimate, like I know the kind of person that you are, like you just want to spread love all over the world. But ultimately, what would be the thing if, once this conversation is more, I guess, mainstream, is there something in particular that could happen or an application for it where you would just be like, yes, nailed it?
Yeah. I think bringing our work, our music, more into the mainstream would be something that I would love to see. Like with January and Julian, that the three of us are, after people have watched the film, that they want to experience it in person, and being able to bring the work to people, but also to be able to, what I love seeing is people who sort of go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And then they start to explore sound, and then next thing you know, they've bought a crystal bowl, and then they're learning this and they're learning that, and I love that. Like, I'm building out a sound certification program because I believe that, and Uncle Noel also, elder here in Perth, he said after receiving our work, he's like, you need to teach this to other people. And I was just like, yes, okay, yes, it's time. And it's just like getting more and more people either using it for personal benefit, or if they want to do it and share it with other groups and people, then that's great. But the more of us that can do that collectively, the better. And then, but in finding our own signature and doing that, like, how do you find your own path in doing that is really key, because everybody's different and everybody wants to receive something differently from someone else. So yeah, when I see people who have maybe, stepped in the corporate world, and they're like, I'm going to buy a crystal bowl, and then they start doing it for themselves, I'm like, yes, that's awesome.
I think what the documentary series can really support is people who are already kind of in that field, but they don't dare to talk about it because it feels like it's just a little bit too alternative, or they won't be taken seriously. But if they can have, a piece of work to say, well, go and,
Yeah,
maybe
that's
I
the
can
ultimate.
too, but, go and watch this documentary and you'll understand why I'm doing this. And then,
Exactly. I think that's the real motivation underneath that I didn't realize existed. But when I first started doing this work, because I came from a very corporate world and very business focused, it was like a flick of a switch. It was like, totally different environment, different thought processes, everything changed. And I remember doing this, and I was looking at these instruments, and I'm like, you know what? People need to take this more seriously. Like, that's part of what this documentary is doing. I've had people come up to me in the industry, who are sound healers, and saying thank you. Like, finally, we can actually have a platform where people are going to take us a bit more seriously and not just put us in a bucket. That it's like that bucket of just being in a certain label. And that was a big part of it. It was like, I remember playing the Shruti box, which is the main instrument featured in the documentary. And when I first got it, it was always a background instrument. And I was just like, no, you're beautiful. You need to be on the center stage. And that's what I've done with it, with the orchestra and everything. Like, that instrument created everything that in the project that's been covered in Does Sound Heal. And so it's part of it, a big part of it is almost feeling like I'm representing the industry to say, take us seriously. Like, this actually is more than what you think it is. And I'm hoping that can come across in that. Yeah.
but I think we're really at that very perfect point in time where people are just so burnt out.
Yeah.
They may be a little bit open to trying something differently, because like
Absolutely.
when you've tried everything and you've got nowhere else to go, it's like, well, there's maybe that, arms up in the air, well, why the hell not?
Yep. Yep.
And then that could be the very thing that changes everything for a lot of people. But
Mm.
I realize how incredibly tiring that must be for you. You have had to like just believe in that and hold that and bring this vision to life.
Oh,
So
I've been laughed at. I've been mocked. I have been, you know, yeah, I've had so many things over the years happen that have really tried to pull me off course of what I believe in. And I've had days when I've been like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I sometimes don't feel like I've got the strength to keep pushing for it, you know, to keep pursuing, because part of what I've found looking back at what I created with my other companies, and a lot of the time it was early adoption, and you know, I created these visions, and then you know, and then these visions, and then people want to come and commercialize them, or you know, take my baby off me, you know, and it's like no, and it's just like, so I've always had to be like, because it's kind of an early adoption phase of where I seem to always get landed in. It has been rewarding and energizing, but it's also been really exhausting and at times quite humiliating. You know, when people laugh at you or make fun of you or don't understand your vision, or you know, things like that. It's kind of it has been a little bit of, but also how to bring, you know, because I bring this work into the corporate field. That's most of my client base, you know, and that took work. I needed to educate, and I needed to use science to meet them where they're at, and then bring them into what they don't know that they need. And then they step into that, and they're like, I had no idea I even needed this. Like, I've slept so good. I've never slept so well, like in like months or years. And so, you know, and it's just an art of how do you meet them where they're at and then bring them into a different place. And I've always sort of seen myself as a bridge between worlds, but with that comes it comes a lot of energy and a constant reigniting of one's faith.
It's so common, I think, in the, not just in the industries that we're in, but in creative industries. It's when something has been invented and has already been adopted, it's somewhat easier, but it's also like it's been done before.
Yeah.
When we have that vision and we're creating something and innovating, we have to believe in it so deeply and keep on going regardless of all the obstacles and the disbelief of everybody else. I know that, like, for myself, there's a part of me that has those moments of like, I want to give up, but there's also a part of me that's like, but we're not going to. So just have a cry and then we're going to pick ourselves up. But would you have any advice for anyone who wants to create something but is really scared of all of, you know, the criticism or the misunderstanding or the stepping out? Because I know that there are. I mean, I meet them all the time in my work, people who come to me because they want to overcome that fear and that imposter syndrome. But in the practical, what do you do when you have those shit days? Because we all have them. What is it?
Chocolate and Netflix. I go mainstream the whole way. I'm switching my brain off, and I'm just going to dumb it down with something really, some days when it's bad, that's a bad day for me. That's like, you know, chocolate and Netflix, just switch off from the world. But yeah, I think when I have those days when I really want to give up, I turn to spirit. I turn to God. I pray. I step into just receiving guidance on what I should be doing. And if I don't know, I don't make a decision. I just sit with it. And it's kind of like a visitor. It's like this visitor's coming to sit with me. And it's just sitting with me. And I'm just like, okay, when is it going to leave? You know, like that feeling, you know, and it's just like, and then I just allow that space. And if I'm feeling, it's so interesting. When I feel like that, someone always comes along and just says something on that day that reignites something for me. It's like God's source is just like going, keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And then other days I've just been, when I've really felt like I'm done, like, why am I doing this? Like, you know, no one's understanding, and feeling like I'm not understood. That's you know, a big one.
That hurts so much, doesn't it? It brings up all that inner child stuff. So uncomfortable.
Yeah, super uncomfortable, and just feeling like, I mean, I only had this a few days ago, like a week ago. I'm like, what am I doing this all for? You know, because I'd lost a friend to breast cancer and she was young, and I was just like, I'm working my butt off. I'm going hard, and I'm like working for this vision, and I'm like, and for what? Like at the end of it all, like what is it? There's nothing like death to kind of make you really, I've had, this year's been a lot of death for me, so it's been a lot of like putting life in perspective. And then I kind of eventually, when I sit in that feeling and I pray and I meditate and do what feels right at the time, and then I kind of sit in that and I'm just like, well, I feel that I've been put on this earth to do a job, and I've just got to put it down into smaller pieces, just keep going, just a little bit each day. Just even if I don't feel like doing something, I'll just do one thing that day, and it'll be like, okay, that's enough, whether it's sending an email or whatever. And then eventually it starts to reignite, and somehow, because I'm so in tune with the universe and the signs, I always get signs when I'm feeling like that. Like even just something little the other day where I felt like that, and I was really in a space of, what am I doing this all for? Like, and I went to the shop, and this lady she was one of the shopkeepers, and she was just so nice to me, and I didn't even talk to her. Like I was looking for something, and she was like, oh, can I help you with something? And then she was just so really lovely to me, and I'm just like, thank you. Like, just that little bit of kindness, or that little bit of just, and then just having good people around you to talk to when you're feeling like that, feeling that support, and just honoring that everything is temporary. I might be feeling this right now, but it's going to pass. And when it passes, I'll know what to do. And if it is still there that I don't want to do this, then yeah, I might pursue that. But when I come out of it, most times I'm like, okay, I've just got to keep going. It's like I explain it to people. It's like running a marathon, and every now and then someone puts a cup of water out for you, and you're like, oh, thank goodness, okay, I can keep going. And then for ages, there's just nothing. It's just road. And you're just running. And the sun's beating down on you. The sun is on you, and you're burning, and everything in your body hurts. And you're just thinking, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to do this? And the only way I can do it is just look at the next foot forward, the next foot forward, next foot forward. And that's what gets me through those hard times. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to let that sink in for a sec.
Yeah, I'm feeling it too.
I love how you just kind of reminded me to ask. I think that sometimes, and I do this too, even though I know better, but I still find myself sometimes in situations where I feel like I don't know how to move forwards. I don't, what's the next step? And I try and think my way through it. And well, because my mind's incredibly strategic. So I was saying sometimes I get to the silver lining before I process the grieving. It's very much that. It's like, well, what's the next thing? It's like, there's an obstacle in front of you. It's like, what is the path around? Thinking my way through it, rather than just taking a step back and taking a breath and asking for help and asking for guidance.
Yeah.
So I think in a way I'm quite used to having that just always tapped in. So the guidance is there immediately, and it's kind of like it's guiding me every step of the way. But then sometimes we forget that our mind can jump in and kind of try to control this outcome, and we need to come back to the heart sometimes and just go like, okay, did I just get wrapped up in a story there that is not still the only way? But yeah, I think I really forget to just simply ask.
Yeah.
Which is I think always that same message of just coming back to the basics. When you don't know, just come back to the basics, come back to your breath.
My golden rule is, if I don't know, if it's not a clear yes or it's not a clear no, I don't make the decision. I just sit with it until I know. Let it work through my body, comes to me through my dreams and all sorts of things, so I get all these visions and guidances and things that help govern, when I'm too much maybe in here.
Yeah. Do you remember your dreams generally?
Vividly, yeah, I have really vivid dreams. Sometimes I get sort of like premonitions, so I'll dream about something that happens. That's been the last few years. It's kind of come up new, and then sometimes just really crazy, weird dreams that make no sense. And I'm like, that was weird. And then sometimes I can wake up and I know it wasn't my dream, that I've tapped into something else because it just energetically wasn't in alignment. So I might have tapped into, and I can actually notice it when my Wi-Fi is on at night. If I have the Wi-Fi on at night, I have the weirdest dreams. So I have to switch it off. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah,
It's
very,
really
very
interesting how
visual.
we just tapped into these things. I feel like a lot of the time people just don't realize it. But when you start to realize it and you start to work with it,
Sorry.
I find sometimes like I get caught up in doing life like everybody else does. And I realize
Yeah.
like, oh, actually that just doesn't work for me. Like I'm too sensitive, too intuitive, and it just, yeah, it can just pick up too many things. Like I found, well, I'm in a very remote place here, but what's really interesting about remote places is that there's a kind of like collective energy, and it's not the most conscious energy here. So when people gather in large spaces or in events, it's like going to, like, what I would describe, it's a similar feeling as if I'm in a big city and I go to a shopping center,
Yeah.
and it's like everything and everyone, like, not people are mostly, they're not really being guided by their intuition and by their heart. They're all stuck in their head. They're being like distracted by all the the signs and the marketing, and they're all doing this weird thing, and I walk out of there completely exhausted.
I totally get
It's
that.
just some places and situations that we find ourselves in because of the society that we live in, and then we realize actually that doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody, but people tend to do it anyway because that's what other people do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it takes a certain amount of courage to just be the weirdo that sits under the tree instead of Christmas shopping.
No, there's nothing weird about that. I'm with you.
So what's next for you? What's the next step or the next project?
Well, I mean, I've been on these projects for like Elma has been an 8, 9 year project. That's just going to be forever. That's just my life legacy. If you, I don't like the word legacy because no one will really remember me in 3 generations. It's just going to be forgotten. So it's not really about a legacy. I think it's more about just planting the seed for the next generation. That's what's important for me. So that's my life's work. And yeah, and then Does Sound Heal, just sort of expanding that and going, getting to following those cosmic breadcrumbs still, and kind of being in a little bit of surrender as to how that's all going to play out. But yeah, big focus at the moment on that, and obviously just doing my music and being of service to the community and using sound as a way to bring awaken people's own divinity.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. When you said the word legacy, it reminded me, I did a presentation recently, and I was talking about, I took one of my installations and I was talking about that, and it was in a corporate environment where people were actually creating this with me, like we created this big thing
Yeah,
together.
beautiful.
And what I was talking about is that, I think that in a patriarchal society, I didn't use these words because I was in a corporate sense and I didn't want to offend people, but the old school way of doing things is to erect a big statue of like a man on a horse and have a plaque with his name and like have it there stay forever. Whereas the more feminine, creative way of doing things is like we weave. We use natural materials, we weave something together, we create something that has a purpose, but that is not meant to last forever. It's meant to last for the time that it's needed, and then it can become something else. And I think that there's a very different flow to that. And it seems more, sometimes when you have something that has been created to last, it can become completely obsolete in a couple of generations.
Yeah.
And then people hold on to, the old tools or the old artifacts because they represent something. And it's like, great, like history is beautiful. Able to be more fluid in how we're creating and reusing and having things that are more temporary. I think there's a magic to that. Like you were saying, like nothing lasts, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't last. And when we can actually enjoy the ephemeral nature of things, I think it helps us as well in that own personal journey, but also collective healing journey.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful place to come from in knowing. I heard this, Marianne Williamson said it, and it just has always stuck with me. And it's like all the children of God are special, and none of the children of God are special.
Mm.
And I'm just like, yes, that's it. Like we play an important role, but there's humility in that. And it's like, for me, it's just doing what I've been guided to do, and not being attached to, even with my music, it's not performing. I don't perform for people. I don't even get applause, and I love it. I'm happy when I don't get an applause. I don't want one. It's like, and people have got their eyes closed, and it's not about me. And that's what I love about it, is that it's about what's coming through me, but it's awakening that divinity within them, so then they can cultivate their own inner light and have their own journey that's so individual to all of them. And what I love about that is it captures that. It's like, it's special, but it's not as well. It's not about me, and
it's about what's moving through you.
Yeah, it's moving through me, and I'm always just here to be of service. If I get, which has happened, get all these amazing awards and all these things that come in, I'm like, wow, that's great. But it doesn't ignite me. It doesn't motivate me. That's not what motivates me. What motivates me is feeling that what I am going to contribute to this world is going to be meaningful, in the sense that it's going to help for the betterment of the planet and not for myself. It's just how do I be of best service in the time that I'm here? Because the reality is, like, I died twice in my life, and I've come close to death many times. So I kind of have a sense and have seen a little bit over what
I know about the one time. What was your second time you nearly died?
When I was 2.5, that was that time when I OD'd on pills that I thought were lollies, and I was on the operating table, dead dead for 3 minutes, and then in a coma for 2 weeks. Don't remember that, I was too young. But in my 20s, I had another situation where I actually went through the light. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and it was I still feel it now, like, that light, like, it's got a magnetism to it. Like, you don't want anything but that light. And you can't turn your head, and you don't even care about looking back, which in itself is a beautiful metaphor, for life. It's like, when you're heading to the light, like, it's just, there's no turning back, and I vividly remember just this wind going past me, because I was going so fast down this tunnel, and it was just like this, and I got closer and closer, and as I was getting closer, I was just feeling like, yes, this is it, yes, because I was like, I wanted to be there. I just wanted to be there. And not in a morbid way, because I didn't think about that, and it was just all my goal was to get to the end of the tunnel. And then as I just got closer, this massive black wall went boom, and I just smashed into it, and it caused me to, like, I was in the hospital, and it caused me to have what was known as the death gasp, and I was just like and then I came back to, and then I just instantly said, I don't want to die. Like, I'm not ready to die, and it was just like, that was kind of a moment of coming very close to death. And then in other instances, I've had situations where I've come very close, and I've been in that experience of being on the other side, and Jesus was there, and I'm like, what? Like I saw it, because I'm not, I wouldn't say that I'm in a box of what my religious beliefs are. I kind of have a broad respect and understanding on all levels. And yeah, it was just such a beautiful, and all I could do was cry. Like I just couldn't stop crying. It was just so beautiful. And then it's like, then you come back and you're here and it's so dense, and I'm like, uh, you
Oh,
know,
it hurts.
oh, do I have to be here? So I actually went through a process of mourning, and when you've had those experiences, you look at life so differently. Like for me, I'm just like, I've just got to do whatever God tells me to do. Like that's it. And if it doesn't feel right, then I don't do it, or if it does, then I do. And whatever that unfolds in front of me is it. But it feels really different. It's kind of like I'm here to do a job, and then I get to go back home. Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. And January, my partner's sort of, sometimes she says to me when good, really exciting things are happening, she's like, aren't you excited? Because I don't go to high highs and the low lows.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, well, I don't know, maybe I should be excited, but I'm not feeling like, erratic excitement or anything
You
like
know
that,
what? I have that very similar experience where I notice people having, yeah, being completely ecstatic, over the moon, so excited, and then having like those deep troughs of what I can only associate with depression.
Yeah.
Um, but I think like as we kind of go further on our journey and we heal many different parts of ourselves, we find like a sense of, I guess, just like an inner peace
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we kind of, that's where we live. So not
Mm.
time, but it's like we have that anchor within ourselves. So things are like, it's never amazing, but it's never been really shit either. We're kind of
Mm.
just in that, like, just
Yeah.
circling around that. I'm okay. Everything's gonna be
Yeah.
okay.
It's going to be fine. This too shall pass. And, I think for 18 months, I actually did like a really deep spiritual practice. It was a Buddhist practice on staying in that middle center. So
Mm.
I went through a period where I avoided myself of any human temptations or desires for about 18 months. And I practiced staying in the center, because they say that obviously with the peaks, like you're saying, and the troughs. And I did this practice for a year. And yeah, and then just ever since then, it's just been, just, yeah, this sense of calm. And just, sometimes there are challenges, and it can be difficult. But yeah, I'm just really mindful. I try really to stay within that center point, because I know if I'm having the high highs or the low lows, it's the opposite will, Murphy's law. It's just you're gonna keep bouncing up and down.
It's gone so dark around me suddenly with
No?
clouds. We're
Yeah.
slowly going, the wet season is coming, and I feel like it's just gone. But it's quite beautiful. There's some being in the tropics,
Yeah, I can imagine it
birds
being
and
quite beautiful.
it's quite magical when, they'll do the burn back or like cut trees or plants down, but then it rains, and after like 2 weeks they're like vroom. It reminds me of, that movie Jumanji.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's the plants that grow, but you can see them grow. It's
Yeah.
that
Wow.
sensation.
Mm,
Well, my love, I am just mindful of time, and I'm so grateful for your time and your energy today. And I can't
thank
wait
you.
to come back and experience your magic.
Yes.
Um, yeah, there was just one thing that, yeah, when you were talking earlier and you were talking about how that energy kind of moves through you. I've been talking a lot recently about flow states, and
Mm,
the godfather of flow states, who wrote it, kind of came to the conclusion that well, and this is a little bit of my belief as well, is that flow state's our natural state. When we're just kind of in the flow of things, we're not getting stuck in our head, we're not overthinking, we're just doing the next thing and we know what to do. But I think the more we allow ourselves to be in that energy of creation, and whether it's, so for you, it's through music, for me, it'll be through art or through healing, which I believe it's one and the same energy, right? We open ourselves up to this energy to flow through us. But as we do that, we embody more creative energy and we're able to share that to others and help them come back into sync. And that's what happens when people are like, oh, I just had the best sleep of my life, or I feel so calm, I'm centered, or I'm connected to my intuition, I know what to do. It's like, that's our natural state. And I just love that when you were talking, I actually remembered coming to your events once, and at one point, I looked up at you and I could see that you in your kind of like your humanness, you weren't there. It was like your soul was there and doing her thing. And it was so incredible, because it wasn't, you weren't checking that everybody was doing things, like you were just in what people call in the zone, in flow, you were doing your thing. And so thank you for this beautiful work that you do, because it makes such a difference. And I know that anyone who comes into that kind of environment, they find a little piece of themselves and then they can carry that with them. And my hope is that always that once you find that little piece, like whether it's the first piece or one of the many pieces that we gather of ourselves, it makes you curious to kind of go and seek more.
Yeah. So, we need as many of us out there doing it as possible.
So thank you for today. And I look forward to catching you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this creative conversation in the Heartscaping Studio. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world if you could take a moment to like, comment, maybe even share with a friend who could benefit from this content. And if you would like to share more time in the studio with me as I discuss all things creativity, mindset, and empowerment, then please consider subscribing to my channel. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.